Welcome, everybody, to the Good Data Podcast. We have a great guest for you today. Garrick Sturgill will be on the show. Garrick is Senior Director at IsoFusion, which, if you haven't heard of it, is a colocation cloud and networking company in the Pacific Northwest. He works in strategy and planning for network buildouts, which include last-mile fiber to the home, which is a business that we can use a lot more competition in my opinion, so I'm glad to see them moving into that market. Our conversation goes all over the place, from the beginnings of the internet and Arpanet through Garrick's work in the iconic Westin building in Seattle, all the way up to the current bleeding edge of networking and low Earth orbit satellites. Garrick packs a huge amount of knowledge into a very approachable package, and I was so happy to have him on the show. Let's go! Garrick, thank you for coming on the program.
For sure.
So I really wanted to talk to you because you're someone who is steeped in every level of internet history, in that, you've been involved in the Westin building and building up some of the backbone of infrastructure and then moving on to data center operations and things like that. So I feel like you've touched every part of the stack, and that's what I'm interested in. So I really appreciate being able to talk to you.
Yeah, just don't ask me any VMware questions.
That's fine. Yeah, that's not really my forte either. So I'd just like to start with your background. So what was your first job in networking when you first started?
Oh, my first job in networking. Well, first official job was probably working for my parents. My parents were a part owner of a computer store up in Seattle called Ballard Computers, and they sold PCs, not necessarily, no Macs. Well, I shouldn't say that. No, they sold, I believe they sold Mac, but so we had like a pseudo ragtag enterprise division, to where you go and you do installs. My stepdad at the time actually ran the service department for the company. So clients would come in and then naturally they would need other stuff done in their offices, and he would send me out on these calls. I mean, I didn't go to school for this, but basically just being kind of tossed out into the world and hey, go fix this.
Yeah, it's usually the best way to learn, really, is, it's like, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm going to figure everything out, and then it'll all kind of come into place, I think.
Yeah, and in those offices at the time, it wasn't mission critical, you know what I mean? The networks inside of an office were it was 10 base T. I mean, it was nothing. Right. People had email, but it was still kind of like a novelty, it wasn't really, companies used it internally, but people weren't sending each other business emails. Right. At least in my experience. I mean, I wasn't super deep rooted into it at that point. I was more of a inquisitive person, wanting to learn and know exactly what was going over the wires. I didn't really care about software back then. I was more into fiber optics and Cat5 at that point.
So then you got somehow you got connected to the Westin building, and can you just first of all say what the Westin building is and just describe it quickly?
Yeah, sure. The Westin building is the interconnection point up here in the Northwest. It's where all the carriers bring in terrestrial fiber into a meet me room, and then there's a couple. There's one Pacific cable that comes into the building, and then there's a couple skinny routes, which are regional undersea fiber cable. Not really undersea, but it runs in Puget Sound. And there's a few data centers in there, and the current company